One of the reasons why I think so many CEOs dedicate the time to the Business Roundtable is because you can have impact.
It's almost a patriotic duty to participate in the BRT.
BRT puts me in the center of the most important conversations.
There just isn't anything comparable.
The economy is now the chief preoccupation of the people of the United States.
Americans cope with gasoline lines and empty pumps.
For the first time in our roundtable history, we are honored to have the president with us.
A new trade bill at home must encourage free and fair trade.
As I sign the North American Free Trade Agreement, I believe we have found our footing.
We owe the children of America a good education, and today begins a new era in public education in our country.
It is wonderful to be back here with the men and women of the Business Roundtable.
Senators cast their final votes around 2 o'clock this morning on the biggest rewrite of the American tax code in more than 30 years.
The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is passed.
The president standing with Republicans and Democrats by his side saying, we have a deal.
We have a deal.
The Business Roundtable was created in 1972, and it couldn't have come at a more opportune time. The centrist coalition that had existed from the post-war era was beginning to erode as a result of Watergate, crises at home, and Vietnam abroad. When you look back at the 1970s, and I lived through it for 4 years in the White House, was what was called stagflation. That is to say, slow growth, high unemployment, and high inflation together. That was thought to be an economic contradiction.
The early 70s were a time of both economic and social turbulence, and a lot of concern in the business community that the economy of the United States was off track. And so a group of leading CEOs got together and decided that they needed personally to engage in public policy debates in order to try to put U.S. economic public policy back on track.
I think in the early days, 50 years ago, General Motors recognized, the leadership at the time recognized the importance of having a voice and working together to support the country, do what's right for the country, and support growth and economic development.
What made the Business Roundtable unique as a very young organization, when I interacted with it, it was only 5 years old, was that it had a collective CEO participation, and it allowed the business community with the largest corporations in the world to speak with a single voice on public policy issues. And that was novel, that was new, that hadn't been done before. It was path-breaking.
Organizations in Washington became just say no people. We maintained a position that we were always trying to find the middle, if we could, and that we were constructive in the process of doing that. But the reason we became effective and influential were twofold. We had the chief executives, and they were our prime implementation people. Secondly, we were a nonpartisan, policy-oriented organization. As long as we had those two features, we stood head and shoulders above any other organization in Washington that represented the business community.
It brings together the leaders of American business and industry. And it's not just the manufacturing sector, it's the services sector. It's the entire breadth of the U.S. economy. They're all there. And it's an opportunity for these men and women who lead these major companies, which are major employers, to come together and talk about what it takes to make America competitive.
When I first joined BRT, it was more of a group which exchanged ideas, but shortly after I joined, it became much more of an advocacy organization. Business Roundtable is really the only institution of the major corporations in America which engages in the political process and brings the CEOs face-to-face with policymakers. There just isn't anything comparable.
I joined the BRT my first year as CEO of American Express in 2001 and served through 2017. The BRT was an incredible convening power And I think that the bipartisan nature of the BRT, they recognized it was important to work with both parties and to build relationships, trying to explain what are the benefits of different policies, not just for business, but the broad society.
So what helped me, especially as a policymaker, is getting from Business Roundtable members and executives their perspectives on the policies that we were thinking of, how it affected their industry, how it affected our constituents, what it would do for the country. You have to have that kind of interaction with business leaders to give you a sense of whether what you're doing is going to work or not, or whether it's going to achieve what you hope to achieve or not.
Both the Roundtable and Josh Bolten and previous CEOs have been so effective in communicating their perspective. It was not necessarily a perspective on which I always agreed, but I always found it useful. I always found it important. I always found it relevant to the legislation that we were considering.
I always enjoyed the opportunities I had as president to work with the Business Roundtable, even when we disagreed. The insights and input I got from the group's members always made me think, and I believed helped make better policy.
The Business Roundtable was an opportunity for me as president to meet with some of our nation's finest business leaders, to share my plans and strategies, but as importantly, to listen to what their needs are and their concerns about our country.
I've hosted CEOs at the White House, including members of the Business Roundtable, that are major employers across America and key drivers of our nation's ingenuity and innovation.
There are a lot of great things about working at Business Roundtable. The best is the members whom we get to serve. They are smart, they are driven, they are pragmatic and very constructive people, and they're patriots, but they don't bring a partisan attitude to the work that they do. In fact, they deeply value bipartisanship.
I think it's important for a CEO to join the Business Roundtable. There are 12,000 lobbying organizations in the United States. Most of those are very focused on their own needs. The Business Roundtable is much more focused on policy that's good for America, whether it's tax or immigration or regulation or education, et cetera. All these things that you would look at and say, how can you make America grow better for everybody, not just for your own industry? And so I think it's almost a patriotic duty to participate in the BRT.
When it comes to why a CEO would want to join Business Roundtable, I think it's a no-brainer. It is the opportunity to make a difference, to participate in discussions that influence policy, to learn about the country. And in addition to doing that, you get to work with your peer group in a way that's unique and constructive and enjoyable.
One of the reasons why I think so many CEOs dedicate the time to the Business Roundtable is because you can have impact. Bringing and having a unified voice gives us a stronger voice. And I think it's also helpful from a government perspective as well, because they're not guessing. They know what are the most important issues to business leaders. And it really spans beyond just the BRT member companies, because a lot of the policies and issues we raise are going to benefit small businesses as well.
They seem to find the most pressing issue and put the most important resources and intentionality behind it. And just having that relationship with BRT, I've noticed that it opens doors for me in my conversations. I think that the BRT puts me in the center of some of the most important conversations.
I want to commend your decades of important work on core economic issues that affect our country's strength and prosperity and the job market that faces American workers. BRT has been a key player in these many years in nearly every economic debate of consequence.
One of the areas where the Roundtable has had the biggest impact is international trade.
America has benefited because of trade, which has mostly been conducted by companies which are Business Roundtable members, and that has been one of the big issues that BRT political issue for decades.
If you wanted to look at the most important thing that could grow an economy, it would be enhancing economic trade and fair trade globally. And that's what the Roundtable believed, and the Roundtable leadership believed for a long, long time. It was very difficult. It took a lot of visionaries to really continue to drive through what was a very politically unpopular position to say, no, in the long run, you're going to be better off if we have access to other markets and other markets have access to us.
Negotiation of the NAFTA agreement, which started under George H.W. Bush. We had a lot of input with the Clinton administration. We met every day almost with Rahm Emanuel with respect to implementation. We were the lead. It wouldn't have happened without us.
Let me just say to all of you, we're going to need your help on NAFTA because to pass it, the Congress and particularly the House must believe that over the long run, it is good for American jobs and incomes.
I felt very strongly about that in fact, NAFTA would not just benefit business, but very importantly, would bring more jobs and would create a more vibrant economy in the U.S. and globally.
We spent a lot of time in the Business Roundtable talking through and thinking through what are the areas that we really needed to focus on. We said our highest priority needed to be help encourage fiscal stability, pass budgets, bring regular order into Congress, and do the work that Congress should do. And we spent a lot of time on that. We also made a priority corporate tax reform. At that time, if you recall, the United States had the highest corporate tax rate of all the developed economies around the world. Again, you were seeing capital leave the United States. You were seeing companies move outside the United States to take more advantageous tax rules and tax rates. And so we said we have to do something to make the U.S. more competitive in terms of its corporate tax rate. Unfortunately, we weren't successful in the 2 years I was chairman, but the work we did there did translate into the tax reform that was done in 2017.
So I think the Business Roundtable plays a critical role in a lot of things and gets geared up to get involved in it when these things present themselves in front of Congress, and the tax reform is one of them. People should understand that having competitive taxes for business is critical to the growth of America.
Getting any legislation through is hard. Tax reform is particularly hard because it affects everybody in so many different ways. The hard part was making sure everybody came along and didn't go in different directions, because the people who could have killed tax reform were the people in this room, the Business Roundtable, the CEOs of the biggest companies. They could have killed it if they all divided and couldn't get behind something.
I don't think we could have pulled this off if it weren't for the kind of help we got from the Business Roundtable and the decision the leadership at the BRT made to focus on the general welfare of the country and the general good that you get from comprehensive tax reform.
Tax reform was a success. The BRT deserves enormous credit. And the CEOs themselves who said, look, I'm going to put aside what may be perfect for my company in terms of what's best for the U.S. economy. And the result was a tremendous gain.
This was a key to unlocking and unleashing the success, not just of many businesses, but of the entire American economy. It teed up the best economic moment in a generation for working families all across our country.
After it passed, we saw one of the greatest influxes of capital back into the United States that we've seen in decades.
Now to that big news of the American economy growing at its strongest pace in 4 years.
The country's strong economic growth comes at a time when we're also experiencing the longest streak of hiring on record. Unemployment just 4%.
We saw an explosion of capital investment, and we saw an ending of the corporations going overseas and being taken over by foreign businesses. And that was gratifying to know that all this effort, we achieved what we wanted to.
The Business Roundtable, I think, in 2021 played a very important role in helping get some infrastructure legislation finally across the finish line. We spent a great deal of time persuading the White House to pursue bipartisan legislation because we felt that that had the best chance of success, then went to work on particularly more moderate Republicans in the Senate to persuade them that it was worth the effort, that they might well find a good partner in the administration, and we would work very hard to bring them together. I think that legislation is going to pay major dividends to the economy for years to come.
My administration is counting on this group as we've made historic investments to rebuild our infrastructure, strengthen our supply chains, and ensure advanced manufacturing of the future happens here in America.
We finally enacted an infrastructure bill to fix our roads, bridges, highways, and broadband. It's been an honor working with you over the years on growing America's economy, creating more good-paying jobs here at home, and preparing our country for challenges in the 21st century.
The Business Roundtable has always issued corporate governance principles, and those principles have included a statement on the purposes and responsibilities of corporations. In the early years, those statements referred to the responsibility of corporations to their shareholders, but also more broadly to the other stakeholders in the corporation. In 1997, the Roundtable's statement on the purpose of a corporation took a different tack, and it was quite explicit in saying the sole purpose of a corporation is to maximize shareholder value.
I got the statement, we looked at it, and I said, this does not represent how we run our companies. And this is more of almost like a legalistic statement as opposed to how you actually run a company, and brought it to the board, and the board agreed.
Beginning in 2018, we began a process of consultation with our members about what did they want our statement of the purpose of a corporation to say about the way that they run their companies.
We took it on with a lot of gusto. And we surveyed our members, we surveyed a lot of other academics and stakeholders, and ultimately came back with a revised recommendation that really focused on not just shareholders, but in fact, on customers, on the people who actually use our products, on the employees, the people responsible for helping us produce the value that we ultimately create, to the communities where we work and serve, and ultimately, yes, to our shareholders as well.
Statements signed by almost 200 CEOs, and this company should focus on all stakeholders, including employees, customers, and local communities.
All we did was come together and state how we run our businesses, which means we have purpose and profit, not either or. And in order to have a long-term sustainable company, you have to take care of all your stakeholders, your employees, your communities, your supply chains. We wanted to be explicit about that. That's all we did, was to put it into our charter. It didn't exist there before. I think it was really important to say that and then to go ahead and be held accountable for it.
I thought it was important that we change it and that we try to describe what we actually do.
To come forward with this kind of a statement that we believe better reflects and more accurately describes what companies, what business leaders, what employees really do every day was really critical.
That opportunity is offered to everyone, I think is something BRT takes very seriously. And that's, why a number of the initiatives that we work on are aimed at reaching people who in the past maybe felt like they were shut out from those opportunities. With the Education and Workforce Committee, I had the great privilege to take that committee over after Ginny Rometty had been leading it. And she, within IBM, had led a big effort identifying the skills people need to have, not just the credentials that would open up new doors. One of the beauties of BRT, especially in this committee, is we were able to learn from what IBM was doing. And so, she challenged all of us.
When I became CEO, I was looking for employees, cybersecurity professionals, and unemployment was high, yet I couldn't find candidates. So we worked with a community college and a high school, and lo and behold, we found a whole new pool of talent that was great, but just didn't have a college degree. It really opened my eyes that this is an issue of access to our companies, not aptitude. And from that day forward, I was committed to skills first. Hire for skills, not just degrees. But I'd also have to open up then multiple pathways for this new pool of talent to join the company.
I think the learning from what other companies are doing, the best practices, just allows every single company to accelerate. Once we come together and we have a strong voice together, we can then influence policy that accelerates that growth.
For someone in our positions as CEOs, you could never imagine how many times we're in the position of trying to mold the two parties together because, you can't satisfy just one side of this. And for our country to be split as it is, I think there is an opportunity for us ahead to think about how do we close that gap. And, BRT, I think, has a unique position to do that.
If we can, as the large employers in the country, speak more often with one voice, it's helpful for policymakers to understand what we think would lead to the most success, to the most growth, to an increase in affluence in an inclusive way for all Americans. And that's what we're trying to do.
Who would have thought at the outset of the pandemic, the medicines and vaccines and things that were needed to address that crisis, which would normally have taken a full decade, all of that could be done in a year. And that's thanks to the ingenuity and the drive of many of the companies that Business Roundtable leads. Whatever crises we face, I believe that the country will, with justification, increasingly look to America's business leaders to help solve those problems, and I think they'll be up to the task.
I hope Business Roundtable's legacy is a strong defense of capitalism and the fact that societies can help provide opportunity for people from all walks of life and help eliminate poverty by a robust capitalist system.
I'm honored to join in congratulating the Business Roundtable on 50 years of making America's economy stronger.
To the Business Roundtable, from a 76-year-old guy, happy 50th.
Congratulations to the Business Roundtable on your 50th anniversary.
To everyone at the Business Roundtable, I wish you all a happy 50th anniversary.
And I want to wish the Business Roundtable a happy 50th anniversary. These businesses are the greatest employers of our fellow citizens in the country.
I expect and hope that your success of the last 50 years will be replicated for at least another 50.
The Business Roundtable, I made great friends, and I learned so much from my colleagues. And yeah, we had an influence on the world in terms of how government thinks and does things. That was great. But what I've walked away with, lasting friendships and relationships.
Congratulations on the 50th anniversary. And here's to America winning the economic competition for the rest of the 21st century.
I've been proud to be part of the BRT, and we're going to carry forward its mission. And I want to thank all the people from the BRT and all the CEOs for the great work they've done with it.
Working together, there's nothing we can't solve. Yes, there's things that we work on that are going to be supportive of General Motors strategies, but it is even much bigger than that. And what we're doing to make sure we have a strong country, we have a country where it still offers that American dream for all of its citizens and beyond. And so I think over the next 50 years, we'll solve today's challenges, we'll end up solving challenges we don't even know about by working together and taking a long-term view.